Today's Bible study might just change the way that you view God. Hey, and welcome to The Whole Truth, where I am taking you through the entire Bible from Genesis all the way to Revelation without skipping anything. Today, we are in 2 Samuel chapter 9, and it is a beautiful story, probably one of my favorite stories in the Bible. If you go to church with me, you know that I say that often because there's all these stories that are my favorite, but this is just a sweet story. It's one that's memorable. It's always stuck in my head since the first time that I heard it. I remember hearing this story under a pastor, my pastor when I was a youth pastor, the lead pastor of the church. I remember him teaching the story. It was the first time that I heard it, and I remember it just it just stuck in my memory. I always remember the story of this guy named Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth is a guy who can't walk, but he's part of the lineage of Saul, and David has become the king in Israel. Mephibosheth is hiding from David while David is seeking him out. Mephibosheth thinks that David wants to kill him, but David actually wants to bless him. Hey, if you want to get the study notes for today's message, for today's Bible study, 2 Samuel chapter 9, go over to Patreon. You can get those over at Patreon. I am working on getting those onto my website. Here's what I have working right now for those of you who are intently following. For those of you who just stopped by here today and you're like, hey, what's this all about? Or maybe you were in 2 Samuel 9 and you wanted some answers and you got on YouTube or got on Google and found this. I'm glad you're here as well. Go over to Patreon. For some of you who are long timers here, you've been encouraging me, and I'm trying to get an organized list. Here's the way I'm trying to do this, where I will have an index on the website, a searchable index where you can go and you can type in a passage, and then it will pull up that passage. If I've already done that video, since I've made it from Genesis to 2 Samuel 9, then you can type in any passage and then you should be able to pull that up, that video, like an index of that video, along with an index of a link, so the YouTube link and a link to Patreon, to go over and grab the coordinating study notes. But I have to do some other things to change that. So anyways, enough about that. I literally am working on it, like physically making that list and going through. There are over 1,000 Bible study videos here on YouTube already. And I am not done by and large. I have a whole lot more to do as we're going all the way through the entire Bible. So go over and grab those study notes. I think that you'll appreciate them, especially today's. I feel like today's study notes are better than maybe normally they feel like. Okay, 2 Samuel chapter 9. Let's start out with the first 5 verses. That's what I've got here in our notes. Let's start out with the first 5 verses of 2 Samuel chapter 9. Now David said, "Is there still anyone who is left in the house of Saul, that I might show him kindness for Jonathan's sake?" And there was a servant of the house of Saul whose name was Ziba. And so when they had called him to David, the king said to him, "Are you Ziba?" And he said, "At your service." Then the king said, "Is there not still someone of the house of Saul, to whom I may show the kindness of God?" And Ziba said to the king, "There is still a son of Jonathan who is lame in his feet." And so the king said to him, "Where is he?" And Ziba said to the king, "Indeed, he is in the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, in Lo-Debar." And then King David sent and brought him out of the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, from Lo-Debar. Now, that might not seem like much, but there's a whole lot packed inside of there, and it moves from David to typology to application so seamlessly, so smoothly. Let me give you let's start out with the preliminary. Let's start with the historical, what's actually happening. David is the king in Israel during this time. This is years and years and years before Christ would come to the earth. David was the king in Israel. David, as king in Israel, is seeking someone from the prior kingdom, from the prior king's lineage. Saul the king, he had a son named Jonathan. David and Jonathan were best friends. They loved each other and they had made a covenant with each other. That covenant they had made was a promise that they would be kind. David had promised Jonathan that he would not only not kill his line of people, but that he would actually show them kindness. David is saying, is there not anybody who is in the line of Jonathan that I can show kindness to? That's what David's trying to do, is show kindness to Jonathan's sons, to his sons and to his daughters. And so he can't find any. He doesn't know where anybody is. He doesn't know if Jonathan has any sons left since he's become the king. Because remember, David had been estranged from Israel for over a decade. He'd been on the run. He'd been driven out of the kingdom because of what had happened with King Saul. As King Saul lost his mind and had an evil spirit. You'll have to go back and watch all those other videos if you don't know that history. But David is looking for Jonathan, that's Saul's son. He's looking to see if Jonathan had any children that he could be kind to. He can't find any. So he finds a servant that used to work in the house of Saul. And he asked him, that guy's name is Ziba. And Ziba says, yeah, there is somebody. He lives in Lo-Debar. Now, this is very interesting that it's Lo-Debar. And the reason it's interesting that it's Lo-Debar, and I've got this down in the study notes, it means that there's no pasture. What it literally means, it translates into barren land. You'll also notice that not only does the guy that David is looking for live in Lo-Debar, in barren land, but he's also lame in his feet. He cannot walk. We saw this from 2 Samuel chapter 2. We saw that, was it 2 or 4? I can't remember now. Maybe I put it here in the notes. Oh, I don't have it in there. But I believe it's earlier in 2 Samuel, we see that when David had become the king, well, I shouldn't say when David had become the king, when Saul and Jonathan died, before David was the king, but when Saul and Jonathan died, Jonathan's son had a nurse, a woman who took care of him. And when he was 5 years old, when Jonathan's son Mephibosheth was 5 years old, this nurse took off running with him when she found out that Jonathan and Saul had died. She thought whoever is the king next, probably assuming it would be David, she thought that David was going to come in and kill this little Mephibosheth boy that she was supposed to take care of. So she goes running with him. He fell on the way. He fell in the run when they were running and became lame in his feet. So he wasn't always crippled, but he was from this trying to escape. So he was trying to escape David early in his life and fell. He was just a kid. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He was just following what the nurse was telling him. You've got to go. They're going to kill you. You've got to go. So he goes running with this nurse. He falls and he became disabled. He was crippled. And so the Bible says he's lame in his feet. Now, years later, David is seeking who he can show kindness to the house of Saul, to Jonathan's children, just like he had promised he would do. And he finds out there's a guy named Mephibosheth who's lame, that same one who had fallen when he was 5 years old. And he lives in barren land. Why is Mephibosheth living in barren land? Because he is hiding from David. There's the historical. This is what is happening historically. Now think like typology with me. Think typologically. Does this not paint a picture of Christ who is searching for us? Christ who did not come to condemn the world because the world is condemned, but he came that we might have life and we might have it more abundantly. Christ who did not come to condemn us because we're condemned already, but he came to show us kindness. He came to seek and to save that which is lost. I love the fact that we see David seeking Mephibosheth. This isn't Mephibosheth coming and saying, I'm crippled in my feet. What harm could I be to you? I live in the desert. What threat am I to you? I don't have an army and I don't have people. It's not that. That is not what Mephibosheth, that's not what's happening with Mephibosheth. It's the other way. David is seeking out Mephibosheth. And there's One more thing that I love in this, and that is that David learned who Mephibosheth was. David knew him. Mephibosheth is trying to fly under the radar. He is trying to stay hidden. And yet, David knew who. If you think of it like poor Mephibosheth, he's like, I don't want David to know who I am. I don't want David to come after me. I don't want David to seek me. But David wasn't seeking him to harm him. David knew him. David knew of him now. And what did David want to do? He wanted to show him. All right, look at what happens next in the story as David is moving to seek out this Mephibosheth. Just like I believe Christ is seeking you and I. Just like he came to seek and to save that which is lost. Look what happens now in verse 6. Now when Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, had come to David, he fell on his face, prostrated himself. And then David said, Mephibosheth? And he answered, Here is your servant. So David said to him, Do not fear, for I will surely show you kindness for Jonathan your father's sake, and will restore to you all the land of Saul your grandfather, and you shall eat bread at my table continually. And then he bowed himself and said, What is your servant that you should look upon such a dead dog? Again, the historical, the typological, the applicable. Look at what happens in this story. What's the historical side of it? David sent for Mephibosheth through this guy Ziba. Mephibosheth gets there. Mephibosheth falls on his face. If he's not crippled enough already, now he literally lays on his face, prostrated himself. He is flat on the floor. I would demonstrate it for you, but the camera doesn't move on the tripod, and I don't want you to see everything else. Yeah, so just imagine with me, laid out flat on the floor, face down on the ground. David says, Mephibosheth, and Mephibosheth says, Here's your servant. Mephibosheth is expecting judgment. He is expecting, I can only imagine what Mephibosheth was probably saying on his way to get to David as they were bringing it. Can you imagine when he received the knock on the door? Can you imagine that? Mephibosheth has tried to live his life in secret. A knock on the door probably scares him. Here's the knock. Mephibosheth opens the door, and there's Ziba. He knows Ziba. Ziba says, Hey, David wants. I can only imagine the look of dread on Mephibosheth's face. Culturally speaking, David should want to kill him. Mephibosheth, he doesn't want to kill you. He wants to show you kindness. Do you think that when Ziba said that it made everything better for Mephibosheth? You think Mephibosheth was like, oh, good thing. All right, it's all good. Well, no, because Mephibosheth got there and fell down flat on his face. This was a position of complete submission. He says, Here I am, your servant. And David has to say to him, David can see what's in him. David says, Do not fear. I am going to restore to you everything that was your grandfathers, everything that was your father's and everything that was your grandfather's, all of their land, I'm going to restore it to you. Pause. Why is that so important? Historically, why is that so important? Because Mephibosheth was living in Lo-Debar. Why was he in Lo-Debar? Because he was in hiding. This poor guy was crippled when he was a child, has lived in barren land. I mean, this is not a time when barren land is like, today we have barren land, but people have air conditioning here in America, I should say. People have air conditioning. We have Amazon. We have Walmart and Kroger's and whatever. We can go shopping. That is not what he had. He lived a very uncomfortable life to try to avoid David because he thought that David would want to kill him. That's what he was brought up. That's what he was raised. That's what he was taught, was that David was going to want to kill him, and if David ever found out that he was living. But he got in front of David, and is that what happened with David? By far the opposite. David says, I want to restore to you everything that was lost. Mephibosheth says, Who am I? Why are you paying attention to such a dead dog as me? This paints a pure picture of the mercy and grace of Christ towards you and I, towards us, creation. Mephibosheth was crippled. He had nothing to offer. He was trying to hide from David. David sought him out, David brought him in. David offered to restore him. This is what Christ does with you. He calls us into his kingdom and he restores to us that which was lost. What Mephibosheth expected was judgment. What he received was mercy. What he received was kindness. Look what happens in the next few verses with me. This is now in verse 9. In verse 9, then the king said to Ziba, Saul's servant, said to him, I have given to your master's son all that belonged to Saul and to all his house. You therefore and your sons, your servants, shall work the land for him, and you shall bring in the harvest that your master's son may have food to eat. But Mephibosheth, your master's son shall eat bread at my table always. Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. That's 35 people. Then Ziba said to the king, according to all that my lord the king has commanded his servant, so will your servant do. As for Mephibosheth, said the king, he shall eat at my table like one of the king's sons. The story only gets sweeter. David not only said to Mephibosheth laying on the ground. Can you imagine Mephibosheth face down on the ground as he looks up at David? David says, I'm going to restore everything to you. He looks up at him and says, why are you showing kindness to such a dead dog as me? David looks at Ziba and says, I've just restored everything to Mephibosheth. Obviously, Mephibosheth is lame. He's crippled in his feet. I want you, the former servant of Saul, I want you and your sons and your servants to go and work the land for Mephibosheth. Ziba has 35 people himself. Well, actually, I should say 36 because he has 15 sons and he has 20 servants plus himself. 36 people in all are headed now to go to Saul's former land. Now Mephibosheth, the grandson, now it's all his. They're going to work the land. They're going to till it. They're going to cultivate it. They're going to help it grow. These are people who knew agriculture. They're going to grow on the land, on Saul, who used to be the king. Can you imagine how much land, how much wealth was there? And now Ziba and his sons and his servants are going to serve Mephibosheth. How crazy is that? David says, and as for you, Mephibosheth, not only are they going to work the land for you, brings him out of barren, dry land, brings him into fine pasture. And guess what? You, Mephibosheth, you're going to sit here at my table and you're going to eat like one of my sons, like one of the king's sons. He went from being in barren land, landless, in hiding, to having a restored inheritance. He went from being powerless to having provision. He went from dependent on charity. Check this one out. He was given a royal standing. He was forgotten, and now he's remembered. 1 Peter chapter 1 and verse 3 tells us that we're born again to an inheritance that is in. This is what Christ does for you. He brings you in and sets you at his. I love that David sits Mephibosheth at the table because I think that speaks to something in and of itself. Let's read that next. This is in verses 11 to 13. Now, then Ziba said to the king, according to all that my lord the king has commanded his servant, so will your servant do. And now he says, as for Mephibosheth, the king said, he shall eat at my table like one of the king's sons. Mephibosheth had a young son whose name was Micah. And all who dwelt in the house of Ziba were servants of Mephibosheth. And so Mephibosheth dwelt in Jerusalem, and he ate continually at the king's table, and he was lame in both his feet. The chapter ends with this powerful detail that Mephibosheth continually ate at the king's table. I want you to think about this. Where was he lame? In his feet. Where was he sitting? At the king's table. Where am I sitting right now? Look at what's in front of me right now. What can you not see right now? You can't see my lower half. You can't see my legs. You can't see my feet. When Mephibosheth was sitting at the king's table, his feet were covered. He is sitting in a place no longer as a cripple, but now he's sitting in place as a son. And this picture is really, again, it's so typological and really includes you and I, because is he still a cripple? Yes. But what about where he lives? Does he live like a cripple anymore? No. Now he lives like a son of the king. He lives with an inheritance. He used to live in barren land. Now he lives in land that produces fruit. He used to be known by his crippled feet, but I guarantee you no one knows him by his crippled feet anymore. Now he's Mephibosheth, the one who sits at the king. He was Mephibosheth who can't walk. Now he's Mephibosheth who sits among. Don't you understand? This is what the Lord does for us. Ephesians 2 and verse 6, he raised us up together and made us to sit together in heavenly places in Christ Jesus. We go from brokenness to sonship, weakness to fellowship, fear to peace, worthlessness to worth in Christ. I love the story of Mephibosheth. And I love there's even one more part, which is this part about Micah, his son. He has this. So now we have the great grandson of Saul. We have Saul, Jonathan, Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth goes to Micah. Okay, Micah, he is an interesting character because we will see him in about, I guess 7 more chapters, 8 more chapters, whatever it is. I think it's chapter 16. We'll see him again when this guy named Absalom, who is David's own son, turns on David. And this guy, Micah, he stands up for David and is supportive of David even to his own peril. And so you see a loyalty that is built in Micah that happened because Mephibosheth went and sat at the king's table. You know, scripturally speaking, the Lord over and over and over tells us that he invites us to his table. He sets a table he sets a table before us in front of our enemies. That's what David sang about it. David, when he was writing the Psalm, said he sets a table before me in the presence of Jesus stands at the door and knocks. And if any man will open up, he will enter in and he will have supper with him. He will come in and he will sit with you. Sitting at the table is such an important feature to understand. And Jesus will. I remember there was one time in the scriptures that the disciples came to Jesus and they said, your mother and your brothers are outside and they want to see you. And Jesus said, these who are here, this is my mother, this is my brothers, these are my sisters. He said, these who are here with me, these who follow me. You see, don't you understand this? That if you've been running from God, you think, maybe whatever you might think, I don't want to try to put words in your head. If you know when I say that you've been running from God, that you've been hiding from him, that you've been hiding from his calling on you, don't you know that he doesn't want to? He wants to bring you in to restore you. He wants to bring you in and make you a son. He wants to bring you in and sit you at his table. And it doesn't matter how crippled you are when you're at his table. It doesn't matter how debilitated you are at his table. It doesn't matter what barren land you've come from when you're at his table, because now this is no longer about what Mephibosheth can and cannot do. This is about the covenant promise that David had made with Jonathan. So when I'm talking to you now, 2025 or later, when you are when you're invited to sit at the king's table, you are there by the covenant promise of Jesus Christ, who has offered to restore you and to set you in heavenly places. Would you put your faith in him? Come and sit at his. I told you I love the story of death. It's a story that is historical. David and Mephibosheth. It's typological. Jesus and those who are lost and those who are sinners, those who are far from God. But it's also a story for you and I that we are invited. Would you come today and sit at the table of the King who would show you kindness because of the covenant that he's made with the Father? All right, well, I hope you've enjoyed today's video, and I hope you'll come back tomorrow as we get into 2 Samuel chapter 10. I'll see you then.